Yeah, pretty good.
Good morning, folks. We're letting folks join, and we'll get this going shortly. We might be a few minutes late. Also, just wanted to let everybody know
There we go.
that we are recording this, so if you don't like that, now's your chance to leave, so. And we'll get back in a few minutes. We're still joining here. I guess we're about ready. Well, I'm sure that folks will continue to join online, but we're here in the office with a good number of folks. Glad to see some faces. Make sure you can hear us, or let us know if you cannot hear me. Or even if you can, actually, that's probably better.
They can't see us here.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I see the thumbs up. We will turn on the camera.
Good to see you.
But we want the other camera. Right. And so I think you. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Carolyn Donnelly. I'm the Water Operations Supervisor, and we're going to have a couple of speakers today. We're going to start off with John Irisari from our office giving an introduction.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Good morning to everybody in the room. My name is John Irisari. I'm one of the two deputy area managers here. I took over for Jim Wilbur when he retired, so I've been on this role for about a year, but I wanted to introduce myself and wish you all a really good morning, and I'll pass it down to our really well-prepared folks that are gonna carry out this meeting today.
And we apologize for if people were confused for the change in the date, but we heard that after we'd already scheduled it, we heard that the state had Good Friday afternoon off, so that's why we moved it to today. And luckily, our first speaker, who is with the National Weather Service, Andrew Mangum, is still able to join us today, and he's going to start us off with the review of last year and an outlook for this year.
Yep. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Mangum, the Senior Service Hydrologist with the Weather Forecast Office here in Albuquerque. And let's get going. I'm talking about the water year review, the 2025 monsoon outlook, such as it is, and the water supply outlook. There we go. So this will include a little bit of a precipitation review. Then we'll also talk about sort of the near-term precip review, looking at the snowpack in the winter. We'll talk about drought conditions, soil conditions, climate outlook, and then finally we'll march through several points along the Rio Grande, looking at our water supply forecasts for that area. Okay, so precip over the last year. This is showing both the percent of normal on the left and the actual ranking, the percentile, on the right for the last year up till April. And you can see, by and large, the state has been very, very dry. The only exception to this has been sort of in the northeastern kind of quarter of the state, where it has been a little bit wet for New Mexico. We're getting above normal precip up there. Even much above normal is the reading in some of those areas. Some of this is complicated by the fact that I don't know that New Mexico's soils really hold on to that moisture the same way that, you know, you see back east, right? So this is something I wrestle with some of my national colleagues about what does drought really mean out here? Yeah, we got a big storm, but that's not fixing the drought, right? That water evaporates pretty fast. So even if it's above normal, we're still living in the high desert, and these are still pretty dry conditions out there. I just want to temper expectations about that. So that's just kind of overall precip, but let's really zero in on the snowfall. Now, last week I did this for the Pecos, and on what's that, Friday? Friday, some of these basins were reading as 0. But we were blessed with a relatively heavy snowstorm this weekend. That does not mean that the snowpack is fixed. You know, you can take a look at this and you can see that none of our snowpacks here, and what I'm showing here is the snow water equivalent. This is how much water we have in the bank as compared to the last 30 years, right, as a percentage of the last 30 years. None of them are even 50%. Including the ones up in Colorado that are benefiting from a much healthier winter than we saw in New Mexico. The best one we've got is about a quarter of normal in the north central part of the state, but the others are reading at 5, 7, 2% of normal. Down in the Gila, it's not even plotting because it's been 0 for so long, 0% of normal. Last week, a number of these were at 0, right? So we're just seeing right now, we're just seeing the echo of the weekend storm. By the end of the week, expect these to be back basically to 0 for a lot of these, and that 26 not to be at 0, but to come way down. another way of looking at this, we can take a look at, it'll catch up here on the screen in just a sec. We can look at these traces here. This is our snowpack development over the year. And I've got here in the upper left, the Rio Grande headwaters. So this is the Colorado one. This is the healthiest one we've got. And you can see that it's riding down here in our lowest 25th percentile for the last 30 years in the Rio Grande, in the headwaters. If we look at the upper Rio Grande, you've noticed that that's popped down to historically low, at least for one little stretch of the winter, and is riding that line all the way down along our lowest snowpack ever. This is on track to be fully melted out, probably 4 to 5 weeks earlier than normal. And then finally for the lower Rio Grande, which we're sitting in right here, this has also hit historic lows and is, despite that little nudge up, essentially melted out, 6 weeks earlier than normal. So it's been a very, very dry winter. Another way of looking at that is looking at this. This is from the National Center for Environmental Information. And these show our climate division rankings over the last 130 years. And so the ranking here is for driest, right? So we have 2 climate divisions sitting here in the center part of the state that showed the driest this is for the last 4 months. This is from December to now, to April. And it's showing the driest in 130 years of data collection for those. In fact, the wettest part of the state up there in the Northeast is really only at the 9th wettest winter, or the 9th, it's the 9th driest winter up there, and that's the wettest part of the state. The rest of the areas we're sitting at 2nd, 3rd, that kind of thing. So really cannot stress enough that this was an extremely lackluster, classic La Nina winter for New Mexico. And when I say classic La Nina, that's just because that Enzo pattern, that oscillation, when we have a La Nina winter, it tends to be warmer and drier. And even though we had a kind of a weak La Nina this year, it ended up with a very classic, very strong La Nina response. And that's been a subject of some study. We think that it has to do with the fact that even though the temperatures weren't that cold in the Pacific, the surrounding temperatures around them were so much higher than normal that we ended up having, in effect, an extremely strong La Nina for the United States. And so that's really what's driving a lot of this is the current thinking. Take a look at our drought conditions. I've got last year on the left, and you can see that this year on the right, it's a little bit worse for where the Rio Grande is going through. The Rio Grande is largely traveling through severe drought conditions or extreme drought conditions until it gets down to Texas when it hits exceptional drought conditions down there, right? So all of the surrounding areas for this are pretty parched and are going to be in need of water if they can get any. And the soils around them are going to be pretty parched. Ultimately, even though right now they might be just a little bit damp because of the really rapid early meltout, but by and large, there's a great deal of thirst in the state for any of this water that we've got. And these conditions have been rapidly degrading over the course of this extremely dry winter. We've had some cold months, but we've also had some very warm ones, really above normal temperatures. But more importantly, we're just in that hot air, hair dryer time of New Mexico where it's just extremely dry air. The atmosphere itself is really thirsty. Any moisture that's in the soil is getting sucked out. All the plants are trying to green up right now. So they're sucking any moisture out of the ground as well. So it's pretty dry out there. But we can take a look at our soil conditions again from last year on the left. You can see that the rankings there were pretty good across certain chunks of the state. We had a decent winter, some wet ground. This year, where the Rio Grande is traveling down through the state, it's a mixed bag. There's some areas that are wet, and that has to do with the fact, some people want to celebrate, oh, we've got some wet soils, this is going to be great. That's actually not good news right now, right? What that is telling us is that the snow has melted out and the ground is a little damp, right? So in about a month or 2 tops, you're going to start seeing this whole map start to look probably pretty dry throughout it. The Rio Grande itself goes through kind of neutral soil moisture conditions and then starts to pass down again some really dry soil moisture conditions where they just never had any snow in the first place. All right, so look here in the southwest and think that that is going to be reflective of most of the state in about a month. All right. If we move forward to the climate outlook, give it a second to catch up. Any minute now. I have faith. Wow. I'm losing faith rather rapidly. What's going on here? This thing is hung up. There we go. All right. So here's our current La Nina, El Nino kind of situation, right? Now, keep in mind that that pattern really means a lot for New Mexico in the wintertime, and it can mean quite a bit in the spring. You know, a classic La Nina spring is really dry, really windy, it's really bad fire weather. That's what we're looking at right now, right? So we're getting another strong La Nina spring at this point, as evidenced by all the massive dust storms we've had, so the critical fire weather conditions that we've had. The Enso neutral, though, that whole pattern, La Nina, El Nino, Enso, it doesn't mean as much for the monsoon. It's really hard to tie that to any kind of trends for the monsoon pattern in the summer. Nonetheless, it's worth talking about that we are in Enso neutral conditions, no longer really controlling the pattern so much. We're seeing the echo of the La Nina in our dry spring, but we're in our sort of neutral conditions. That means that the equatorial Pacific waters are not really above or below normal that much, right? So it's not really driving some of those wind patterns that we would see. That's expected to continue throughout monsoon season, right? So again, this is not going to be a player for us. There's nothing that we can draw from this that's going to tell us anything. The only thing I can tell you looking at this is that there is a troubling growth of a signal for a second La Nina this winter. It's too early to bite down on that, but we are seeing a growing trend towards a double dip La Nina, which would mean another dry winter probably next year. It's not always a lock. I want to say that this isn't like a one-to-one correlation. It's just that La Nina, El Nino, they load the dice basically for winter. So we're going to be watching that pretty closely. You know, I've got enough doom and gloom in this presentation that I don't want to say next winter is going to be a bust, but we're watching that. But let's take a look at the kind of near-term climate outlooks here. So for May, we're looking at a pretty dry, warm May. We're looking here at above normal. This is likely above normal, 54% chance of above normal temps throughout much of the state in May. That includes a 13% chance of below normal and a 33% chance of sort of near normal temperatures. But bottom line is it's likely it's going to be a little bit warmer than normal. Now, these maps can look pretty extreme. You can see that big red blotch and be like, oh my God, I got to get out the shorts and the sandals right now. That is not what it's telling you, right? This does not reflect the degree to which it's going to be warmer, right? It could be 1 or 2 degrees warmer than average, and this would verify and be true, right? So this just tells us that there's a chance it's going to be some amount warmer than normal. Similarly, we're looking at, we're kind of leaning towards like 46% chance of being below normal precip in May with a 21% chance of being above and a 33% chance of being near normal. Slightly higher chances for being a little bit drier in the northwestern part of the state. Throughout the Rio Grande, though, basically leaning towards a drier than normal May. So expect a warm, dry May, lots of winds, kind of what we've been seeing. All right, climate monsoon outlook for May, June, July. This takes us through the end of spring, right into the beginning of monsoon season. And again, oh, hasn't caught up yet. There we go. All right, again, we're looking at a stronger signal for above normal. So keep in mind, we're going to be looking at those warmer temps. Don't know how much warmer, but cranking up the heat a little bit. But the precip picture is starting to become a little bit mixed, right? Most of the state is in kind of equal chances, which means that it could be normal, could be above normal, could be below normal. It's got equal chances for any one of those, which is our fancy way of saying we don't really know what the monsoon is going to be like. I will say that when it's equal chances, statistically, that usually pans out to a near normal monsoon, or at least near normal precip for this rate, for this time of year. There's a little bit of a growing signal for slightly above normal precip in the southwestern part of the state. And as we move forward through the monsoon season into the June, July, August timeframe, which we'll update here in just a second, or a few seconds. There we go. Then that signal is growing a little bit, spreading out at least into the southwestern part of the state, which is, I'm really reaching for some good news here. Most of the state looks like near normal monsoon, maybe a little bit above normal in the southwest. That would be great. The southwest is getting hammered right now with extreme drought conditions, or exceptional drought conditions. Sorry, the worst drought conditions that we've got. So God knows they could use the water. So that's June, July, August. As we finish out the back half of the monsoon season, that signal spreads out for precip as well. And we're looking at leaning towards above normal through much of the Rio Grande Valley. Not necessarily a lock for above normal, but that could be good news, right? So again, we could be looking at least a near normal, possibly above normal monsoon season with some good storms. Now, the trick especially with the way things have been going in the state over the last 30 years and going with the climate, is whether or not that's going to be really beneficial moisture, if that's all going to come in these massive knockout blows like we saw last summer, where we kept issuing flash flood emergencies in the state because we were getting 2,000, 3,000 year events or probable max precipitation events. Those are less helpful. So we're hoping for lots of good activity, sort of strong storms, but none of these crazy storms that we were getting last summer where it would just blow out arroyos and then the heat would crank up and everything would evaporate out of the soil and you wouldn't really get a ton of benefit. So considering all that, the drought outlook is, we'll populate here in a second. Basically, the bottom line for the drought outlook is that wherever we have drought, it's going to persist. Anywhere that we don't have drought, you're going to see it develop. That's what the message is here. Now that red, when we say persist, doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to stay the same way that it is now, right? I think that the drought conditions are likely to get substantially worse over the next 6 to 8 weeks throughout much of the state. If the monsoon catches on and we start getting that rain, then we'll slow that down and turn it around if we get good, steady rains. It's going to be hit and miss. Some parts of the state aren't going to see those benefits. Some parts are going to see a lot of benefits. So that we can't predict very well. We simply don't have the science to tell you exactly where it's going to rain this far out. But let's get into our water supply forecast. Now, considering all of this, these are slightly complicated graphics. So I want to show you what's going on here and walk everyone through these graphics. And then I'll summarize them as we march down from Colorado down through the northern part of the state for water supply. All right, so what you're looking at here is essentially two forecasts. Right, you're looking at the National Weather Service forecast, and you're also looking at the forecast from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which, unless I'm mistaken, is what you guys really cue off of for the Rio Grande, right? So good, we're going to try to include as much of that as we can in here. For various reasons, some of the sites won't have the most up-to-date NRCS forecast on there, but I've got the numbers. I know what the forecasts are. I'll try to walk you through that as best I can. But let's take a look at this graph. So there's a shaded column area there that runs from March 1st to August 1st. That's the forecast window. We're telling you how much volume of water in thousands of acre feet we expect to pass through this point of the river during that window. All right. The blue area that you're seeing here, this blue area that's kind of tapering and tapering and tapering, think of that as our plume of uncertainty, right? The bottom of that represents the volume that we say we have a 90% chance of getting above that volume. The top of it, we only have a 10% chance of getting above. And you can see that it's very broad in January, and that's because we don't know what kind of snow we're going to get for most of the January, February, March, April. So there's a lot of uncertainty. It tapers down quite a bit as we get to March and to April because we've already seen the snow. So we know, right? The rest of this is based off of climatological averages for precipitation during the spring, right? That's what's, so it's taking what we've seen and what we expect to see and giving you a forecast. That blue line that's running through the center, that's the National Weather Service forecast. That's our 50% forecast, right? This is like, you got a 50-50 shot of being above or below that line. This is what we sort of expect. These bar graphs here, these are the NRCS forecasts, right? And that goes from 10, 25, 50, 75, 90, right? So there's only a 10% chance of getting above that top line. There's a 50% chance of getting above this middle point here. Right, so these are the numbers that I'm going to be queuing off as we go through. There's also the median and the average shown here, kind of running across the center of it to give you a sense of what it's like. And again, these median and averages are run from 1991 to 2020. They will be updated again in 2030. So moving forward, and just waiting for a second, we'll start off with the Rio Grande Wagon Wheel Gap up in Colorado. This is sort of the headwaters of the Rio Grande, right? The National Weather Service median volume is 310,000 acre feet. We're in great agreement with the NRCS for 310,000 acre feet. The Weather Service forecast is that we're going to, our 50% forecast is 205,000 acre feet, which is 66% of the median. There's a 10% chance that that volume will exceed 93% of the median. So we have a shot of hitting normal volume up there. It's not a good shot, but it's one of the best shots we've got of any of the points that I'm going to show you. The NRCS is saying that their forecast is a little bit rosier. It's 74% of their median, and they have a 10% chance that it will actually exceed average values. But there is no chance really that we're going to see, a gut buster of a flow going through here, right? It's not going to be above normal, like wildly above normal. That's just not going to happen. We don't have the water out there, and we certainly aren't going to get it. For the moving downstream, this is going to get a little repetitive, so I apologize for that. Have some coffee if you need it. South Fork, Rio Grande at South Fork, Colorado, really good agreement for the medians between the Weather Service and the NRCS of 112,000 acre feet. We're forecasting about half of that volume, 49%. Is our 50% forecast. There's a 10% chance that we will exceed 78% of the median. NRCS is saying that they have their expected volume is about 54%. It's a pretty good agreement. We're both saying that probably we're going to see about half the normal volume and only about a 10% chance of getting 3/4 to 80% of exceeding 3/4 to 80% of that normal volume. Moving down to Del Norte. Really good agreement, 480,000 acre feet. We're forecasting 61% of that median value. NRCS is forecasting 65%. There's a 10% chance from us that will exceed 88%, and a 10% chance from the NRCS that will exceed 97%. So there is a chance that we'll get pretty close to the normal volume. Keep in mind, we're all looking at points right now that are still up in Colorado, right, where we saw some pretty beneficial snows, something much closer to a normal snowpack. And that's really what's informing a lot of this. Here we are at the Alamosa River above the terrace. This one's a little bit lower, 61,000 acre feet. It's not a huge contributor, but that's nothing to sneeze at. We're looking at 40% of the median. The NRCS is looking at 48% of the median. Both of us agree that there's only a 10% chance that we'll get above 60 to 65% of that median. Almost no chance whatsoever that we'll hit normal at that point. Moving down to the Conejos River at Mogote, we're forecasting 51% of the median there. NRCS is forecasting 50. This is really good agreement in the models, and we have two different sets of models that we're using for this, but we're reaching the same conclusions. So you can bite down on that pretty well. We're both saying that there's only a 10% chance of getting above 71% of the median. So once again, very, very low, vanishingly low probability of even hitting normal. At this point, Culebra Creek at San Luis. We're both forecasting about 72 to 75% of the median for this volume, with only there is a 10% chance that we will actually exceed normal at this point. That would be great news if this was more than 17,000 acre feet, but at least it's something, right? It's a bright spot. Moving down now, we're getting into New Mexico, okay? At this point, we're having some graphing issues, so the NRCS forecast is not shown on this graph, but I've got the numbers here. We are forecasting 36% of the median, so only about a third of the water that we should see. The NRCS is forecasting a little bit rosier at 46% of the median for this point, but again, that's less than half. Both of us say that there's only a 10% chance of exceeding 70,000 or 70% of the median at this point. Moving down to the Rio Hondo near Valdez. All right, we're forecasting about a third of the median, 34%. NRCS is a little bit rosier at 42% of the median for their forecast. Both of us are agreeing that there's only a 10% chance of getting above about 63 to 70% here. And this is going to be basically the story marching down here. All right. For the Rio Pueblo de Taos below Las Cordovas, we're forecasting about half of our median. NRCS is much lower here. There's a big disagreement about how this is modeled. And they're only forecasting 15% of the median coming out of here. We have a 10% chance of exceeding 100%. NRCS has a 10% chance of exceeding 45%. Now, this is a big discrepancy, so I'm going to tell you right now, honestly, the NRCS has more success at this particular point in terms of their modeling. I would bite down harder on their numbers than ours, which is probably smart anyway if you're thinking about water planning.
Are your forecasts intended to be unregulated flow?
Yeah. So that is the big difference, right? The NRCS simply observes the flow, right? And they do good statistical analysis of that observed flow. We are trying to get, well, I don't want to throw my brothers under the bus here, right?
I think they're a combination of both.
It's both. We do,
because,
yeah.
like San Marcial, They don't
Well,
have any option, but it's historical flow, which is highly regulated.
which is highly regulated. I'm not even sure I'm gonna show San Marcial because they don't have any confidence in it, the NRCS, right?
Every week.
And yeah, neither do we. But we are modeling the river, the National Weather Service is modeling the river as if there were no dams on it, essentially. And so this is like the flow that should go through. So once we get down to New Mexico where it's tightly regulated, you're starting to see that lockstep agreement that we're seeing in Colorado diverge quite a bit. The other part of that equation is that Colorado monitors its citizen water use to a much tighter degree than New Mexico, right? They are all up in those farmers' business about watching every drop that they get through. We have a lot of acequias, we have a lot of withdrawals, we have a lot of things that are happening that are less well reported to our modeling, right? So we don't have a good sense, and that is introducing more and more uncertainty of the National Weather Service model and the NRCS model to a certain extent as well. Rio Chama below El Vado Dam, we're forecasting about a third of the normal flow coming out of that. NRCS is looking closer to half or a little bit above half. They're also forecasting about a third of the flow out of there. Both of us are saying that there's a 10% chance to get above about 2/3 of that flow that we should see. Santa Cruz River at Condillo. All right, we're forecasting 30%, less than a third of the median. NRCS is forecasting 46% of the median. Both of us are saying there's only a 10% chance that you get about 2/3 to 3/4 of what you normally see going through that point. We're rapidly moving our way down towards the end of this depressing list. Oh, nope, that was the last one. All right, very good. That was the last one. There are some points further south that we modeled, but we're starting to get to the point where they're so regulated that neither model has a ton of confidence, right? So think about this as the amount of water that's going to go and start to hit the control structures, right, that's going in. Bottom line here is that, as I showed you, none of these are looking good. The water supply models, the water supply outlook is pretty grim. We're looking at somewhere between a third and a half of what we should normally see. And that is entirely reflective of a pretty dismal winter. Really, really driving that, and a pretty dry fall, in fact. And that's all I've got. I'm happy to take any questions, have any discussion.
Is this the same, is the model that's giving your forecast similar to the national water model?
Nope, that's a completely different model entirely. The National Water Model is being developed. It's a good tool. It's being developed for forecasting, flood forecasting, not water supply.
Okay.
And it's being developed for the millions of miles of ungauged streams that we have. It is very much an experimental product that is struggling to be remotely accurate here in the desert Southwest. So, but it's a brand new model. All of our weather models really sucked 40 years ago, right? And so they've gotten a lot better. So just give it a couple decades, and I think that water model.
Well, I'm not sure I'll see that. Anyone? Oh, Ray?
The NRCS, when they do their forecast, they do their forecast for the amount of SWE that's available for that day, this time of year, that day. And sometimes you'll see something that will say 200% of normal or median.
Right.
When in fact it's only still like an inch of.
Right, because
Well, the
normal is like
percent-
1 millimeter,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Like the Chamita snowtail today is at 120%
Yeah.
median, because median's probably nothing.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if the National Weather Service does that as well.
No, we don't look at percent of median in our models. We actually look at amount of snow.
Okay.
We don't pay any attention to percentages. We're using both precip reports and the SNODAS model that we've developed, which actually is a pretty effective and accurate model. We also correct that with flight lines that are carried out when we have the funding to do that, to correct for the snowpack. So we're looking at absolute amounts of water in our model. That's one advantage that we have over, I think, the NRCS model.
It's just tough to try to explain that to somebody who does not.
Yeah, when you see something that, when you see 2,000% of normal after a real late snowstorm, it's like, what does that even mean, So.
Yeah. Anybody online have a question or anything? Somebody thanked you for clearly presented bad news.
That's our job at the Weather Service. We are the bad news bears, so Happy to
Well,
help.
I don't know that we'll improve the
I was
news all
gonna-
that much. So if there's no other questions for Andrew on the outlook, we're going to move on to reclamation, and Lucas is going to present expectations for river and reservoir operations for this year. Lucas Barrett.
Okay, it doesn't want to use the F keys.
Well, you probably want to go to the top too.
There we go.
Okay.
All right, good morning, everybody. As Carolyn mentioned, my news isn't really going to be much better than Andrew's, but I'm going to basically give you kind of our expectations for the rest of the year for 2025, as well as go into a little bit of 2024 before that, just to kind of go over how our forecasts did from the previous year. Before I get into that, I did want to just go over some kind of terms. There's going to be a couple slides here, just kind of some different terms for those who might not be as familiar with the basin, just to get everybody on the same page. So there are many different agencies and users of water throughout the basin. And I just wanted to kind of go through some of them, give for example, if I say reclamation, that basically just means Bureau of Reclamation, or if I say the Corps, that's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have IBWC, which is down near the border between U.S. and Mexico for the International Boundary and Water Commission, NRCS, which is the National Resource Conservation Service. They're the ones that provide us our forecasts. Then we have some of the cities like Santa Fe, as well as the Water Utility Authority, which is Albuquerque. And then we have some of the irrigation districts like MRGCD, which is the Middle Rio Grande Conservation District, EBID, the Elephant Butte Irrigation District, and EP1, which is the El Paso County Water Improvement District. And that also includes the water that they get at City of El Paso. Some other mentionings that I might do throughout this presentation are some of the operating rules, such as the Treaty of 1906 Convention, which is basically between U.S. and Mexico. And then there's the Rio Grande Compact, which is the major agreement between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, apportioning the Rio Grande water. Article 7 restrictions, which is a big one in terms of restricting storage of Rio Grande water in post-1929 reservoirs. For us specifically, that's going to most concern us at El Vado, and that's when usable storage at Elephant Butte and Caballo is less than 400,000 acre feet, and that's most likely going to be the case all this year. And then in terms of project authorizations, each dam has its own set of federal laws in terms of how it can store and release water. And then also there's an operating agreement between, for the Lower Rio Grande for EBID, EP1 reclamation that was signed back in 2008. And then another big part, just to make people aware, is that there's also different types of water. So there's native or natural Rio Grande water, which is what you most likely will think of as basically the water that originates within the Rio Grande Basin, including up in Rio Chama. But then we also get San Juan Chama water, which is water that's actually imported from the San Juan of Colorado River into the Rio Grande Basin through, through the San Juan Chama project. So that is a big chunk of contractor water that I'll talk about later. And then there's supplemental water, which is water that Reclamation leases to help augment flows in support of the Rio Grande Silver Minnow. And the other main type of water is P&P water, which stands for Prior and Paramount, which is for the 6 Middle Rio Grande Pueblos. And then I promise this is the last slide. So this is just the list of hydrology terms, if anyone is confused kind of what any of them mean. So CFS is kind of cubic feet per second or flow rate. You'll see that being used in our hydrographs, which is just flow rate over time. We also have acre feet, which is basically the volume of water in our that we usually use for reservoirs, which is basically the amount of water needed to cover 1 acre to depth of 1 foot. The runoff forecasts, which is basically the forecast that we use in our model for the NRCS. It provides a volume between March through July, or in some case, actually in the Colorado case, it's usually April through September. And then I will also go through a little bit of the SNOTEL data. There's snow telemetry that's up in high elevation mountain watersheds that's used to monitor snowpack, precipitation, temperature, and stuff like that. So this is kind of just a list of everything that's kind of going on. Next, just to kind of give an outline of the basin for those who may not be as familiar with it, and kind of highlight some key points. So starting actually on the Rio Chama, and I just want to get my pointer out here. Starting on the Rio Chama, which is up here, we have Heron Reservoir, which is actually off the main stem of the Rio Chama. The Heron Reservoir actually collects all the water that's coming in through our San Juan Chama project, as well as a little native, but that's all bypassed through that reservoir. The first reservoir that's actually on the main stem of the Chama is the Elvado Reservoir, which is downstream of Heron, as well as the Rio Chama. So that collects all that water. And then from there, we have Abiquiu Dam, which is a core reservoir. And then going further down, we have the confluence of the Rio Chama as well as the main stem of the river. So if we had Colorado portion, the Colorado come in through here and then come down through New Mexico. The gauge right before the confluence that I will be showing our expectations for is going to be the Rio Grande at Embudo, which is approximately right here. And then I'll also show the results from the gauge at Otoe Bridge, which is essentially right after the confluence of the Rio Chama and the main stem of the Rio Grande. Then further down, we have Cochiti Dam, which is another core reservoir. Most of that's passed through. And then this little hash kind of going in here is the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, as well as some of their diversion dams, which leads us over to the map on the right, basically showing Albuquerque. I'll show kind of our expectations for flows around Albuquerque. And then going further down, we have Isleta diversion, Santa Casia diversion for the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. And then before we hit Elephant Butte, we have, I'll show the results kind of what we expect for Elephant Butte inflow at the Rio Grande San Marcial gauge. And then we have Elephant Butte Reservoir, and then right below it we have Caballo Reservoir. And then we'll also mention about what our expectations in terms of releases out of Caballo Reservoir for the districts south of that. And then I already kind of went a little bit over here, although I didn't mention necessarily authorized purposes, but just to go through each dam really quick. So we have Heron, which, as I mentioned, is a reclamation reservoir and stores the San Juan Chama water supply, and mainly for, I should say, and additionally, it's used for recreation purposes. For Elvado, again, that's a reclamation reservoir that can store both Rio Grande and San Juan Chama water. Going downstream, we have a little bit more on the Rio Chama. I mentioned the Abiquiu, which is a core reservoir that can store both Rio Grande and San Juan Chama water, and can also be used for recreation, flood control, and sediment purposes. For Cochiti, again, that's the first dam on the main stem, which is a core reservoir that stores San Juan Chama water, can be used additionally for recreation, flood control, and sediment control. Then there's Jemez, which is generally a dry reservoir, so that just means that there's no storage for most of the year. That's also a core reservoir and mainly used for flood control and sediment purposes. And then heading all the way downstream to Elephant Butte, it becomes a reclamation reservoir. which can store both Rio Grande and San Juan and can be used for recreation and flood control. And then finally, Caballo, which is kind of like a re-regulating reservoir right below Elephant Butte, which is a reclamation reservoir as well. It only stores Rio Grande water and can be used for recreation, flood control, and sediment control.
Lucas?
Yes.
Avacu's not authorized for recreation because there's a pool there. It says incidental.
Probably like Elvado.
Elvado,
Just used for
okay.
recreation when there's
Yeah.
water enough,
Yeah.
but not authorized for it.
Gotcha. All right.
Remind us that next year.
Thanks. So just to kind of go into how these forecasts are created, what drives essentially this process. So as mentioned earlier, we use the volumetric forecast from the NRCS, which is based off of snowpack, soil moisture, and other antecedent conditions. From that, the model will actually select a year based that a historical year or hydrograph at all these NRCS locations. It's based off of a similar volume, and in some case, and generally, I shouldn't say generally, but in some cases we override whatever the model picks as a similar year if we have a better expectation of what the runoff shape is going to look like, and then we'll use that year instead. And in this case, we actually use 2018, and I'll show a little bit of that later. In addition, we can alter that hydrograph to match current conditions and what we kind of expect. So if the hydrograph, for some reason, if we pick like a year that has a late or an early peak, or I should say a late peak, and then we know this year is going to be really hot, we can basically move that peak in our forecast earlier to match what we think will actually happen. And then basically the model will then try to kind of act like a operate water operations person, and take into account basically a bunch of policies in terms of what's coming in, and in terms of compact restrictions, flood control, and keeping in mind channel capacities below all these reservoirs, and water deliveries for municipalities as well as irrigation districts. And it also looks at demand plans from water users and historical data to really to drive the model. So this is just a quick diagram kind of showing how it all works with the NRCS forecast. So we'll get the NRCS forecast, which is, as I mentioned, either March through July, or for some of the upper gate, or for some of the Colorado forecasts, it's actually April through September. Just as an example, we use this March and July, which is most of the New Mexico forecasts. So we'll get this forecast, and then the model will basically either it will select the closest year to it, or we can provide it the year that we want to use. In this case, we use the 2018 hydrograph. So for the 2018 hydrograph, essentially it will place it will take the hydrograph from 2018, and then it will ratio that hydrograph up and down to perfectly match the NRCS volumetric forecast. In this case, it measured it down in this example. And then it will just take the rest of the year for in terms of the forecast. So before the forecast period and after the forecast period. And then it will attach that hydrograph that it created to one of our headwater gauges or tributaries. So just to go quickly into 2024, just kind of showing what the model did as well as what actually happened. So 2024 for Heron, we did get slightly more inflow than we were expecting into Heron. As you can see, the storage was a little bit higher than our 50% line. And I guess I should back up here for a second. So one thing to mention is that so we have our 50% forecast, which is our most likely forecast that Andrew was talking about. So there's a 50% chance it could be above or below that line. And then we have our 10 to 90% uncertainty. And then this orange line is basically the observed over top of it, just to show how we did. And in general, the heron inflow, we matched it fairly well. There was a few storms events in June, July that we couldn't have forecasted that far ahead of time. That did end up bringing up heron storage slightly higher than what we predicted, but in general, we still got pretty close to where we thought it would be. And at the end of the year, we pretty much nailed exactly where we thought we would be, around 70,000 acre feet of storage at heron. The one thing to mention is that with heron inflow, you can see that we did get a couple of additional storms in August and October, and that actually helped us allocate a full allocation at the very end of the year. You can see a small September allocation here going to the bottom right, showing basically a full allocation, which is what we projected. The one thing that we did not anticipate that you can see for heron outflow, so in our model, you can see that there was pretty much no releases from October to December. We did end up releasing some water, and that was for some of our first fill operations to increase the storage at El Vado. And I'll get into that a little bit later. In terms of El Vado, you can see that instead of a nice peak kind of in early mid-May that was projected, we kind of had a series of like double, triple peaks almost as there was heating and cooling events throughout the period. But in general, the volume ended up matching fairly well. And then basically the rest of the year also matched fairly well, except for at the very end, you can kind of see where we have this big increase, or I shouldn't say big increase, but increase in storage at El Vado starting in mid-October, where we did our first fill testing. So this is our basic, with the construction period ending, we wanted to test the capability of the reservoir. So we went, what we did was we went up 10 feet to, in this case, it was around 9,500 acre feet. And we stayed there for a couple of weeks. We didn't see any issues, but we were just mainly concerned about any leakage from the dam, anything that could possibly, we wanted to ensure that it was stable and safe. At that point, everything looked all right, so we decided to increase it another 10 feet to 6810, which is about 16,000 acre feet. And that's basically what you can see right here. We were looking at increasing another 10 feet, but we had the dam started freezing over and we didn't want to damage any of our instrumentation, so we left it at that throughout the winter. Going down to Abiquiu, basically you can see the similar story. Instead of a nice kind of peak that was projected, it kind of had these like three little peaks, but for the rest of the year, we pretty much nailed it in terms of what we expected. Abiquiu storage, we pretty much hovered around where we wanted to. It was a little bit outside where we were expecting, whether it was a little bit below or at the end of the year, a little bit higher than we were expecting. This ended up being result more from upstream releases in terms of, releasing water down to Elephant Butte. And you can see that here in the 2024 Abiquiu outflow. So we never did reach kind of the 1800 CFS here. We ended up getting 1500 CFS, but never needed to really go above that with, again, kind of these little triple peaks. And then we matched the year fairly well. The one big difference here is we were planning on releasing some of the, or most of the PNP water and leased water kind of in this November, December timeframe. Due to plugging issues below Caballo,
Below Abiquiu.
or Abiquiu, sorry. We ended up having to delay that while work was going on, and we started releases kind of mid-December time period. Going down to Cochiti, in terms of the inflow, or as I mentioned before, Cochise is kind of a pass-through reservoir, so inflow and outflow pretty much equal each other. It did show, or we did get a lot earlier peak than what was modeled, although we were still kind of pretty close to the 10% exceedance, and then it just went down from there where we pretty much matched what we were expecting for the rest of the year. In terms of storage, this up and down is actually fairly minimal amount of storage, and that's the only reason that the model can do these straight lines is it has perfect knowledge of the inflow beforehand, so it knows the exact outflow that it needs to kind of keep this steady trend. In reality, it's more of a process in terms of going up and down, and you'll notice that in the results for the 2025. In terms of Elephant Butte, again, we had that kind of little earlier peak, and it was also a little bit higher than our most likely scenario, but in general, it still kind of showed a similar trend that we were expecting. Because of the little bit higher peak, we did get a little bit more at Elephant Butte in terms of kind of the second peak after it turned on. And in the very end of the year, we pretty much nailed where we were expecting Elephant Butte to be at 175,000 acre feet or so. In terms of outflow, we projected that releases would stay on for Elephant Butte, excuse me, till about late September, early October. With most of the water coming out between June and August timeframe, and that ended up being pretty good. And then in terms of pool elevation, it's a similar story as Elephant Butte storage. So I'll go ahead and skip Caballo inflow since that's pretty much just Elephant Butte inflow. In terms of Caballo storage, our plan was to essentially get up to about 50,000 acre feet and just stay there for a little while. We did end up starting this downward trend going to our end target a little bit earlier than what was modeled, but in the end we both ended up around the same place. In terms of the usable storage, you'll notice, and this is again pretty much just Elephant Butte plus Caballo storage. The model expected more, or to get out of our. One thing to mention is this dark black line is basically at 400,000 acre feet, which is the Article 7, which is when you can and can't store upstream. So we essentially were projecting to go into Article 7 mid-June. It actually happened closer to a little later June, but still generally fairly close to what we expected. And then usable storage ended up pretty close to where we expected at the end of the year. So to kind of go into current snow conditions, and honestly, I should have changed this so that it's maybe brown up here. I can't do that on the fly though, but pretty much all this is gone at the moment. A little bit at the very high elevations, but we'll show that here. So this is kind of all the SNOTEL locations that are in the Rio Grande area. That Andrew already kind of pointed out a bit, and some of these slides will be very familiar to most of you. So in these slides, again, Andrew already kind of shared this. I'm just pointing out some of the key ones here. So this is for the Rio Grande headwaters. In these, the black line will be this year, 2025. I also put last year in which is the orange line, 2024. And then I also put 2018, which again is kind of what our hydrographs are based off of in these forecasts. And you can see that up until this last weekend, it was actually matching up fairly well with 2018, or this year was matching up fairly well with 2018. They did get a little bit of a higher peak, not by too much. And then we got this little extra peak kind of here over the weekend, so that should definitely help increase some of our snowpack to a little extent. It definitely won't save us, but it will help. Going to the San Juan, so this is basically where we get our water from the San Juan Chama project. Again, it was matching up fairly well with 2018 in general. A little bit higher peak But up until this past weekend, it was kind of doing this very similar downward trend that we were expecting that we were seeing in 2018. Going over to the Rio Chama, a similar story, matched up again with 2018 fairly well, which I should say isn't really a great thing, figuring 2018 was not a great year at all. But actually this last weekend kind of put us in line with what we were seeing in 2018. And you can kind of see in 2024, we had about a median type year in terms of the snowpack. But yeah, this year definitely not looking too good. Going over to the Sangre de Cristos, currently, I should say, again, fairly similar story. So in terms of matching up with 2018, we did have, and what you might have saw in the previous ones that I failed to point out is a lot of this that got us up to the point that we are now was from these early storms in October, November that you can clearly see in this graph. And then we've been just kind of coasting along there. And now we're dropping to kind of where we were in 2018. Had a little bit of a higher peak, if you want to call it. Like I said, we've just been kind of straddling that for a while. But yeah, nothing great in that respect. And then going down to the Jemez, again, most of the SWE that was up there was from the storm in November, and just kind of straddling that for most of the time. 2018 actually did get a little bit of a higher peak, so we might even see less than what we did coming off of Jemez than we did in 2018. And then you can kind of see the little storms that we've had since the melt off there. All right, so that all leads into the actual projections for 2025. And I'll wait. And some of this I've already mentioned, but I just wanted to kind of go over it again. So in terms of model assumptions, again, we use the 2018 hydrograph shape for all these key headwater points, and we applied those NRCS forecasts to the 2018 hydrograph shape. One thing to mention for P&P water, the storage call currently is 39,000 acre feet. That could definitely change in the next month or with the upcoming NRCS forecast. Currently, the max storage in El Vado is going to be about 25,500 acre feet, and the max storage in Abiquiu that we're allowed to have P&P water in is 20,000 acre feet. So we can kind of use that to try and get to that 39,000 acre feet. Although years like 2018 that were so dry, we didn't end up being able to store the entire amount that was called for P&P storage just because the water or the snow melt and water was not up there. So this could be another similar year where we don't manage to get quite the full amount that was called for. For El Vado Reservoir, currently we are in this first fill operation to try and get up to 6820 feet, which is about that 25,500 acre feet. And then the plan is to basically hold for 30 days to monitor how the reservoir is doing at that elevation. And then afterwards, we plan to essentially vary between 6,800 to 6,820 feet, although I should specify, and this goes to the second bullet point, that our plan is to mainly stay above 6,810 feet. So you can actually, I think I could probably change that to vary between 6,810 to 6,820 feet, which is about 15,000 to 25,000 acre feet or so. So we'll probably just stay in that range. And the reason that we want to stay above the 6810 foot mark is because that is basically where our outlet works is at. And unlike previous years, we wanted to avoid clogging, or I should say, in past years, we've had clogging issues with the outlet works because the reservoir was so low. So we're hoping to avoid some of those clogging issues by staying above that 6810 feet. In terms of Caballo operations, we're expecting EBID EP1 in Mexico to likely start on May 30th. And then with EBID, we're expecting an end date probably late June, early July. So they'll probably only stay on about a month. With EP1 in Mexico, maybe heading into sometime in August. The most similar year to compare this to is 2022. So if you want to look back to kind of a year that was similar to that, that's kind of close in terms of the releases that we're expecting. Currently, the Mexico supply is at about 22% and may slightly increase in the future still. And then we're expecting a total release from Caballo between 231 to 307,000 acre feet, which is about 26% to 37% of their total supply down there, with the most likely around 250,000 acre feet or 28% of their total supply. And then just kind of looking at the stream flow forecast for some of these points and also comparing that to 2024. So some of the key, we have some of the key locations here looking at Rio Grande del Norte. So that's kind of the headwater on the main stem in in Colorado. You can see that's about 60, or the forecast for and this is for the 50% or most likely scenario, is at 65% of normal. And last year it was 93% of normal, and you'll basically see that in all these, which is why there's a whole bunch of down arrows in terms of this year is just looking a lot worse than last year. And as we go south in the basin, and I think Andrew already kind of pointed that out, it only gets worse. So our best is basically at the headwaters, which isn't even at average, it's still below average, with going all the way down to gauges like Rio Grande at Odawi at 30% of normal is very below average. And other key locations such as the Rio Blanco and Navajo diversions, which is where we get our San Juan Chama water from. They're about 50%, slightly over 50% of normal. And then El Vado, some inflows into El Vado is only about 1/3 of what we're expecting, so 33% of normal. Going all the way down to the Rio Grande at San Marcio, which I wouldn't trust, as Andrew mentioned, because of all the operations and stuff that's going in there. But just to kind of point out how bad they're projecting it to be, they're only showing 2% of median expected to hit San Marcio. And realistically, it's going to be more than that. Actually, I think that we've already passed that in terms of the forecast. So to get through the forecast, we'll go through, start at the top, we'll have Heron Dam. So on these lines, we have it's basically the black line up until early April, and might be a little bit hard on your end to tell the difference between the black and the purple, but just look at, so the forecast basically starts in early April, and then you can see everything kind of splitting from there. And then the purple line again is the most likely, or that 50% exceedance, and then the 10 to 90% uncertainty is kind of going around that. For Heron inflow, we're expecting maybe a peak of around 600 CFS coming into Heron by mid-May. So not even maxing out what's the capability of our tunnels coming from the San Juan Chamo project, which is closer to 1,000 CFS. So yeah, in general, not going to see much coming in from the Azotea tunnel at all. And you can see that in Heron storage, basically peaking at only about 75,000 acre feet before dropping to pretty much the lowest levels that we've seen since Heron has filled, of possibly only 20,000 acre feet at the end of the year. In terms of Heron outflow, we're expecting probably, so one thing to point out is we have a bunch of these little spikes kind of here. So we are planning on doing rafting releases or weekend rafting releases throughout most of the summer and possibly up to early fall. And that's basically what all these little peaks are for. This first block of water is essentially MRGCD's water being released to meet their downstream demand. And then this bigger chunk of water here in August, September, which this might actually be moved a little bit out based off of what we know, maybe starting early September into late September. This is basically a lot of waivered contractor water being moved downstream, such as Albuquerque's and Santa Fe's, to Abiquiu Reservoir. And then at the very end, we have basically some base flows, just to 100 CFS coming out of El Vado. In terms of the San Juan Chama project allocation, we will likely see possibly the lowest allocation on record at only, I think it's about 37% is what the most likely is. Yeah, it doesn't look great in terms of what's coming into Heron in general.
What would that make the volume?
37, so what would it be? 40?
What percentage?
37%, so what, 35?
Something like that,
35,000.
less than 40.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, so this year, we're probably not gonna suffer so much on the rafting releases, but since rafting releases are often based on water from the previous year, next year may be more tough for that.
So you expect that year, nobody carrying over?
No, otherwise there'd be nothing there,
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
but that's not much, yeah.
yeah.
We're also balancing the needs of El Vado, of continuing that, so I would just keep your eye on things.
Yep.
We always do.
All right, going downstream a little bit more to El Vado Dam. So one thing to mention quick is kind of this first fill that I mentioned throughout this presentation a bit. So first fill is essentially a standard practice after the construction period. If you all remember, the restriction for during construction was the 6785 feet, which was only about 2,000 acre feet of storage. And basically our goal with this first fill is to slowly keep increasing our ability to store water in El Vado. So during the winter, as I mentioned before, we already did the first two steps of our first two stages of our first fill at 68, going to 6,800, and then again at 6,810. Due to freezing at the reservoir, we didn't continue to 6820, but now we're trying to do that with this runoff coming in. So our goal is to essentially get up to 6820, which are 6,820 feet, which is roughly 25,200 acre feet. And we are actually almost there. I think we're at about 6817 or 6818 feet as of today. So we're getting pretty close to that 25,000 acre feet. After that, we plan on staying there for a minimum of 1 month. And then from there, as I mentioned before, in the assumptions for the modeling will pretty much vary between 6810 to 6820 feet for the rest of the year. So coming into El Vado, for the inflow, showing a peak at around 900 CFS. I guess one thing to mention is that the peak likely already happened probably last Saturday, and I think that was around 1,000 CFS. So it was a little bit slightly higher than what we expected for the most likely scenario. And I guess to give a little bit of good news, I was surprised at how well that kind of flattened off and didn't go, kind of just stayed up close to 1,000 CFS for multiple days in a row. Now with this cold period, it did kind of shut off the runoff, going down to about 400 CFS. That we see here in the model, but I do expect it does look like there's still SWE up in the mountains and the high elevations, so that might come up to about again, maybe to 600 to 800 CFS. Probably not enough to pass the first peak about a week ago, but enough to give us a little bit more water to have some fun with. From there, in terms of Elvado inflow, pretty much just going all the way, just kind of trending down from there. There's this increase in May, which again is the release for MRGCD to kind of meet those, to meet their downstream needs. And then from there, there's rafting releases throughout the year, or I should say water from Heron, to meet rafting releases throughout the year at about anywhere between 400 to 600 CFS for rafting releases on the weekend. And before we have
I missed the first
big block of
10 or 15
water
minutes.
being released, which is basically all the contractor waivered water coming out in August, September timeframe. And then from there, it's just staying around 100 CFS for the remainder of the year. In terms of Elvado storage, basically the story that I said before. So getting up to that 25,000 acre feet, staying there for about a month, and then it might then dropping off from there. In the 50% scenario for these runs, it was about June, July timeframe when P&P water that's being stored in Elvado didn't need to be released, which is why it kind of drops down from there right away. Going downstream a bit more to Abiquiu Dam. So Abiquiu inflow essentially is Elvado outflow, so I won't really go too much into that. In terms of Abiquiu outflow, maybe reaching a peak of around 700, 800 CF, or probably closer to around 700, 800 CFS. And then pretty much just kind of going down from there. Again, you can see kind of an uptick for MRGCD's water. In reality, this might be moved over a little bit earlier in the year. So we'll see what happens in terms of what releases that we can see out of there. But as soon as MRGCD kind of runs out of their water, probably around late June or late May time period, we'll start seeing major decreases in terms of what's coming out of Abiquiu, and then kind of just going down from there into for the rest of the year. In terms of storage, we'll probably end Abiquiu actually slightly higher than where we began, or might be about the same. This is mainly from Albuquerque's water being stored in here. So again, last year they had a full allocation, so they'll be sending their waivered water downstream to likely fill up Abiquiu to at least where it was, if not a little bit higher. Going over to the main stem in terms of what we expect for Embudo, we have we're expecting about 400 CFS in terms of an actual peak, we can expect about 400, maybe 500 CFS to come from the main stem of the river in the most likely scenario. So not much of a peak at all, actually, probably, or most likely less than what we've actually seen so far this year. But if you look at the main stem right now, you can see that we're just kind of trending downwards. The snow melt is coming, or I should say the high elevation snow is starting to melt off, which will end up creating this little peak from Colorado before kind of ending the year and just kind of staying there around 100 CFS for the remainder of the year before kind of coming up after Colorado Irrigation District shuts off, kind of going back up to 400, 500 CFS at the end of the year. But there'll be a good portion of the year where Embudo will probably be around 100 CFS, or 100 to 200 CFS.
Hey, Lucas, there's a question
Yes.
that maybe is easier to address right now. Casey wonders if the Abiquiu outflow forecast is taking into account the downstream channel, the current channel capacity constraints from the sediment flood, not just the older ones.
Okay. And I don't think we have a specific number.
But didn't you limit it to 1,000?
And I was so I did limit the outflow to 1,000 CFS for Abiquiu outflow because we don't really know for sure what the downstream capacity for Abiquiu is I think that's kind of going to be kind of more of a test in terms of slowly going up in terms of outflow. That being said, you can see in terms of for ABAQ outflow, it never actually reaches 1,000 CFS, which is what I limited it to anyway, because the runoff, there isn't enough runoff for ABAQ to go up that high.
I guess
So
the
this is
answer
not
is
being
we
limited.
had some limits, but
Yeah.
we didn't really need them.
Exactly. Going downstream to Cochiti Dam. So for Cochiti inflow, this is essentially what's coming, right below the confluence. So what's coming in from the Chama plus what's coming in from the Embudo gauge that I went over. You can see kind of just staying around 600, 800 CFS until about June. And this is essentially when the model thinks that MRGCD will run out of most of their water. And from there, it's just going to drop off and kind of go up and down between 200 to 400 CFS. For the rest of the year. Again, Cochiti is pretty much a bypass reservoir, so inflow is pretty much equal to outflow. For Cochiti storage, realistically, the observed will probably do more of an up and down as you saw in the 2024, but it will stay around this most likely line. And the other thing to mention while I'm here that I didn't do previously is for 2018, it was a very poor monsoon year. So you'll see that throughout this. There was a few little spikes, and you'll maybe notice a couple of them throughout here. We don't know if they'll actually happen. All we can do is cross our fingers and hope that it will. The seasonal forecasts showing are correct, and we will get above average monsoon forecast. But to be on the conservative side, these model runs don't really show much of a monsoon at all. So going downstream a little, off channel, going over to Jemez Dam outflow. This shows with most likely getting a peak of around 125 CFS. In reality, if based off of what we already saw, if that was which was likely the peak, I think we only actually got up to, I think it was 80-ish CFS or so out of here, or out of Jemez. And then we're pretty much kind of just going down from there. And it doesn't seem like there's any more snow up there either. So I'm expecting it just to kind of trickle out to, I don't know, 0 to 10 CFS coming out of Jemez. So, here soon, so yeah, not expecting too much to come out from there. In terms of flows at Central, so this is right in Albuquerque. We can see kind of flows probably staying around 200, maybe going up to 400 CFS until about that June timeframe, late May timeframe. Again, when MRGCD kind of runs out of their water, and from there it's just going to be a hard year with flows likely going around 40, 50 CFS for most of the season, except for here you can see, again, a few monsoon storms, very minimal, but we don't know if those will actually happen at all. But yeah, it's going to be a very dry year for, as mentioned throughout this presentation. And then going up after kind of Colorado shuts off in October, as well as MRGCD, and kind of going up from there. Going downstream a little bit more to Bosque Farms, very similar story, kind of just going down from 200 all the way down to maybe around 40 CFS, and kind of just staying there for a little while, possibly starting to dry out towards June, July. Actually drying within this reach specifically will probably even happen earlier than that, within May. And then just basically stay that way until October before starting to increase as irrigation reduces, or needs reduce. Again, going downstream to Santa Casia, same story. currently around, I think, 100 to 200 CFS, and basically just kind of dropping off from there. Again, we have a few monsoon peaks. We don't know if they'll actually happen. It's just kind of what happened in 2018. Hopefully we get lucky, as I mentioned, and those will be much bigger, or well, at least maybe not bigger, but a lot steadier. And then before coming up at the end of the year in October. Then going downstream to our two last reservoirs, going to Elephant Butte Dam. Elephant Butte inflow, very similar story to what I mentioned before with San Acacia, going down from 200 to basically to the end of the, or to pretty much nothing coming in. Again, there's a few monsoon signal or storms in here. We don't know if they'll actually happen. In terms of Elephant Butte outflow, we're expecting to start releases, I think, around April 30th. We'll stay up there. We'll go up to about 800 CFS for about a week before dropping down to 400 to 500 CFS until the irrigation, just to preload Caballo before the irrigation season starts. As soon as EBID, EP1, and Mexico come online on May 30th, we'll likely increase releases out of Elephant Butte, going above 2,000 CFS and kind of staying up there, slowly going down toward the end of the irrigation season, maybe sometime in August. Going into Elephant Butte storage, it is going to be, as I mentioned many of times, it's going to be a very dry year. We're already probably seeing about what the peak in Elephant Butte storage is around as soon as we turn on in April. That will probably be the highest storage that we'll see, around 200, maybe 275,000 acre feet before dropping all the way down to Elephant Butte's, getting close to Elephant Butte's minimum pool of maybe 10 to 20, or around 10, 15,000 acre feet at the end of the irrigation season before coming back up. So the lowest has been since basically maybe the 50s or so. Going downstream to Caballo Dam. Caballo inflow, pretty much what is Elephant Butte outflow, so you'll see the same pattern there. In terms of Caballo outflow, kind of what I already mentioned, we're expecting the districts down there to come on May 30th. EBID will probably stay on for about a month, and then after a month, you can see these flows are decreased to maybe around 1,200 CFS or so. And then EP1 and Mexico will kind of just stay on for another month or two, kind of going into August timeframe before shutting off. In terms of Caballo storage, basically we're going to start our preloading, as I mentioned before, get up to that 45 to 50,000 acre feet. And then from there, we'll probably just start kind of decreasing right away as we're expecting the requests from the districts to probably be higher than what we can get out of the generators at Elephant Butte, which is why we do this preloading period. So we have some wiggle room to drop all the way down. And then we'll probably end the year around Caballo's minimum pool of around 12,000 acre feet. And then to just look at the Rio Grande usable storage, not much to say besides we're going to be in Article 7 all year round, which is no surprise. We don't even, we aren't going to get up past 400,000 acre feet.
We did in 2006 because we had one of the best monsoon years.
Yes, maybe we'll have an amazing monsoon and it will just shoot right up. So that actually ends the presentation. I did want to mention that I do now have this Rio Grande AOP dashboard that's you can find on our water operations page. The link is really long, so it's easier just to look at the water, or type this in for the water operations page and then click this link here. We are in the process of redoing our website though, so this might end up changing actually soon. So I might.
Unfortunately, we are not in the process, but
yes.
Higher levels of reclamation are, so.
But either way,
if you see issues, let us know and we'll do our best, but no promises.
Yes.
Yeah, they screwed up all the USGS stuff, the way that the gate.
Yeah, and they probably haven't even moved to the platform.
It takes an hour to check
Yeah,
Mhm. So you can see all these results and more at this website on a nice little dashboard. It still is the March forecast, but I plan on updating that as soon as I'm done with this meeting. So the April forecast should be up momentarily, and then I think that's it. So, if you have any questions or comments?
Question. Forecast period, you said March to July, is that changing to April to July?
No,
With the NRCS April 1st forecast?
they still give them March through July.
they're just not.
It's just you have to go through their website to get it.
Quick question from the comments, and probably you guys from the state can answer. So someone asked, any idea where New Mexico ended 2024 with its debit status to Texas? What was it, 2,500 additional? So, yeah. So Bill, I think it increased by about a couple thousand acre feet. So it's now at 122.
By the end of the last December,
Yeah.
right now.
Well, no. I think that's what he's asking. So at the end of 2024, it was at 122,000 acre feet. Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I've got a correction to that. It was minus 124,000 acre feet.
So you took the debit down, is that what you're saying?
No, it increased, but only by a couple thousand acre feet. And I think Norm's right. It went to 124,000
And how is the,
negative, sorry.
this forecast project the debit?
We did the debit, we didn't look at that.
No.
Look at that. I noticed you have, when irrigation in San Luis Valley shuts off, the forecast flows seem to rise fairly dramatically. Did you have any input from Colorado Division of Water Resources on the in-season diversions up there or deliveries?
IN, not END, in season.
Within season.
We get those emails from Craig that tell us what they're doing now. And right now, their delivery obligation, because they've delivered so much in the off-season based on what they expect to see, on the Conejos is 0% curtailment. And on the Rio Grande, I think it's still 10%.
Oh, Dylan.
So, yeah. So that's why Embudo was showing so low.
And in the model, it will actually calculate how much, based off of the projections at Del Norte and Magote, and how much Colorado needs to deliver to the state line. So it will keep track of all that and adjust appropriately in terms of how much reaches Lobatos.
Norm, you can go ahead and unmute if you have a question.
Andrew, there was a question earlier from Taos Pueblo to see if they could get your presentation.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask him if I could just send it out.
Absolutely.
And he's in a PDF. So for those that wanted the Weather Service presentation, I'll send that out after.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to observe that I think the state of New Mexico is in terrible condition with regard to compact compliance this year. We're at a minus 124,000. The debt ceiling is minus 200,000. There have been 5 years in the compact history where the annual debit has exceeded that amount. I think I saw 163,000 acre feet forecast at Otoe.
I think it was 310, wasn't it, Ottawa?
Like,
Okay.
I think,
Well, at
I
any
think it
rate,
was about 310,000.
okay. And I don't know how much has gone downstream. Hopefully somebody, I think there's actually a website that tracks that, the change in usable storage. At any rate, if the Chama flows are going to be stored and consumed for prior and paramount water, and we're not going to get much of the snow melt runoff through, the debit could be really large this year. We could violate the compact this year.
But on the other hand, if it's a good monsoon season, New Mexico could do pretty well. So it's a difficult thing to predict. But
Well,
you're
there we
right,
go.
there's,
Yeah, we're depending on the monsoon for compliance. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Norm. Anyone else have questions?
Have I got the prior and paramount target right? You're trying to store 39,000.
We're doing our best.
That
That was with
That's
the
what the
April
target-
forecast number. The May is the final determinant, but of course the runoff will probably have ended in May.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, well, I'm glad that so many people were able to join and glad to see some faces in the room as well. Thanks for coming. And we will post the reclamation presentation once we've got it 508 compliant on our website. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Great presentation.
Thank you.